Um, so I was just going to talk a little bit about, I framed it through this idea of capitalist anxiety and market violence. And I guess that kind of explains it, the work that I do with ultimately a social change sort of perspective behind it. Um, Background of me, I'm kind of an unusual person to be in a business school, partly because I've got a funny accent. I'm originally from the city of Glasgow, which has got a nickname of Red Clydeside. I grew up in Glasgow during the 1980s when it was a time of turmoil under Maggie Thatcher's prime ministerialship. And I was involved in various trade union kind of marches when I was a young kid because my dad was a union leader and a politician and stuff. So that's kind of explains why I'm talking about some of the things that I'm talking about today. Um, I think in terms of COVID and working from home, this isn't just a switch in how we do work and what's going on in the world of work. We're all kind of experiencing this COVID crisis in different ways. I've had a very interesting experience. I'm sure we all have had. Obviously, in all of our workplaces, we're all under pressure. We're all kind of worried about the financial situation and what the union is doing and what the bosses are going to do. We've all had to switch things online and learn how to deal with constant back-to-back Zoom meetings and feeling zoomed out. And, is it a capitalist conspiracy that Zoom are actually behind COVID so that they can make loads of money? I don't know. The other thing was that my wife and I actually moved home. We bought a house just before the COVID crisis kicked. And having to move house and, deal with all of that during COVID was a real stress. So I'm sure we're all kind of got these things going on that are creating anxiety and stress for us. And, meaning that it's not just business as unusual by switching everything online in terms of how we work. The other thing that's really been causing me a lot of stress and anxiety, I'm sure this is shared by a lot of other things, is worrying about friends and family, particularly if you're not originally from Australia, which has, dealt with COVID quite well. And the biggest thing that's stressing me out every night is what's going on back home in the UK. I've got family back in Scotland, and as everyone probably knows, the UK response to COVID has been absolutely disastrous. Huge amounts of deaths, and recently, a few days ago, a shift in the messaging, which is kind of very vague and talking about staying alert rather than staying at home. And, a lot of kind of focus on this that's really just about trying to achieve herd immunity and really to save corporate capitalism rather than any interest of protecting public health. So these are the things that are shaping, how we're going through our lives at the moment under this crisis. And, all of that rubbish stuff is happening, but then the good stuff has been taken away as well. Personally, I play football for a university team. I like to DJ and I like to go out and go to nightclubs. I like to, share time with friends. And all of those things have been taken away for us. So it's a bit of a double whammy that we're, all of these worries and stresses and anxieties, yet all the things that make life just about worth living and stop us from jumping out the window, they've all kind of been taken off the table as well. So it's definitely not business as usual. And that's why I think mental health is really important. And, there's been a lot of conversation around this from people like the World Health Organization and also the Australian government, who have got the Head to Health program and offering COVID-19 support around that. And that's something we need to all be watchful and mindful of, is that we're all dealing with mental health stresses and issues here, and that it's not easy getting through this while we're working at home. And we need to be looking out for not just what work needs to be done, but actually can it be done in a way that protects our mental health and our well-being. In terms of my work during the COVID crisis, social marketing or critical social marketing, the area I work in, actually does have a health behaviour change focus. So I have spent quite a bit of time on, sort of through an association I'm involved in, preparing COVID statements or sort of looking at the behavioural change research evidence. So that's something that's been a lot of my time spent at home working through the pandemic. But also, COVID is actually exacerbating a lot of the social problems that I'm worried about and that I work on. Things like domestic violence is going through the roof, alcohol abuse, workplace and industrial relations. It's having a devastating effect, not just on potentially on health, but on society and on a lot of these social issues. And a couple of areas that I work on in particular that are major concerns. We know that in Australia there's an alarming rise in online gambling, and if you can see this graph here, there's been a 71% increase in expenditure in online gambling during the crisis. And we can see how the gambling industry has actually pivoted and adapted to COVID by encouraging people to bet on various activities. We do still have live horse racing on in Australia. We do also have betting on basketball in Tajikistan, or the weather, or betting on how many COVID deaths or how many COVID infections each country will have. So gambling is still a major concern. And I've been working on an ARC project about gambling, and we decided, look, this is actually really important to not stop or pause this project, but we need to keep going during this pandemic. So we've kind of tried to adapt to that by doing Zoom participant interviews, by keeping in touch with our participants over email and text, not only on what the effects of COVID are and how that might affect the project, but also to get them to send us any things they notice relating to gambling and the COVID crisis. But it definitely has affected the project. Our next stage of field work, depending on people betting on sport, and we know that most sport at the moment is off the table, although that might change quite soon in Australia. And then another major area that I work in is energy consumption and I guess energy disadvantage. And another implication of us all working at home is we're using more energy. And for those people on low incomes, for those people that their energy bills are a real hardship on them, that's causing a major crisis. And indeed, the energy regulator has actually had to intervene and try and reduce the prices that retailers are charging, but also to mitigate some of the effects on people that can't pay their bills. For example, banning companies from cutting off energy supply and providing additional subsidies to people who struggle with their bills. And again, in working in this area, we've been trying to, my people that I work with have been trying to keep on going during this crisis, doing desk research, reviewing the literature, doing Zoom Delphi workshops with reference groups and householders, doing policy analysis, doing all the kind of things that we can still do while we're working at home and we're working online, that can keep these kind of social agendas driving along. And one kind of resource that I found very helpful in doing that is this document here, Doing Fieldwork in a Pandemic. And this was just something that I actually stumbled across just in kind of my everyday. It's actually a kind of a collaborative or an open source kind of document that gives researchers lots of different ideas and how do we adapt, how can we do social research using online or other sort of methods and materials that are not necessarily possible during COVID. So I guess what I really wanted to say is that, yes, we've got a lot of stresses and anxieties. Yes, there are violent things going on in the market and in society due to COVID or are being exacerbated by COVID. But our kind of job as researchers is to try and make sure we look after our own mental health and well-being, but also to try and make sure we help the people we are trying to serve in dealing with these important social issues. Thank you.